It was a calm Friday evening in the town where almost everyone knew each other, or at least recognized familiar faces. The streets were quiet, the sky slowly darkening, and the warm orange lamps along the sidewalks had just begun to glow. She walked alone, hands tucked into her jacket pockets, heading home after a long day helping at a small charity event. Her steps were unhurried, and her mind was still replaying the smiles she had seen earlier, people thankful for warm meals, volunteers chatting with a sense of purpose. She liked those moments. They made her feel connected to her community. Even if no one knew her for who she truly was, she wore simple clothes, nothing that stood out. Her hair, slightly messy from hours of moving boxes and serving food, framed her thoughtful expression. She wasn't thinking about the world around her, not really. She was just enjoying a rare, quiet moment, the kind most people miss when life moves too fast. As she turned down a street not far from home, a police patrol car crawled around the corner. Inside were two officers, both looking tired and slightly restless. The night had been slow for them, too slow, and they were hoping for something to break the boredom. When they spotted her walking alone, their attention locked onto her immediately. The car slowed down beside her. She noticed the headlights shift in her direction, but kept walking, not expecting trouble. She had nothing to hide, nothing to fear, or so she thought. One of the officers called out through the half-open window. "What are you doing out here?" His voice was sharp, not rude but not friendly either. She paused and turned, her expression calm. "Just going home," she said softly. The officers exchanged looks. Her calmness didn't sit right with them. They stepped out of the car, closing the doors with little thuds that echoed in the quiet street. "Walk over here for a second," the older officer said. Gesturing toward them, she took a few steps closer, but kept a respectful distance. "Is anything wrong?" she asked, her voice steady. The younger officer folded his arms. "You're walking alone at this hour. We need to know what you're doing and where you're coming from." She nodded politely. "I was at a charity event. It finished late, so I'm heading home." But they didn't seem satisfied. The older officer stepped forward, studying her closely, almost as if trying to find a reason to accuse her of something. "Got any ID?" he asked. She reached into her pocket and handed him her wallet. Her hands didn't shake. There was no fear in her expression, only patience. The officer flipped open her ID and stared at it for a moment longer than necessary. Something about the name caught his attention, but he didn't react outwardly. He passed the wallet to his partner, who widened his eyes slightly, but quickly masked his surprise. "That name. You're related to," the younger officer started. She gently shook her head. "I'm just going home," she repeated. "That's all." The officers struggled to maintain their composure. They hadn't expected this. To them, she had looked like just another girl wandering around at night. They had assumed she would be scared, quiet, easy to question. Instead, she stood calmly, meeting their eyes without hesitation. "We don't care who you're related to," the older officer finally said, though his voice lacked the confidence it had moments ago. "Rules are rules. We have to check." "And I understand," she said simply. "But I also want you to understand that I wasn't doing anything wrong. I cooperated. I answered your questions. I showed you my ID." Few people walking nearby slowed down, watching from a distance. The quiet street suddenly felt heavier, as if everyone sensed tension building. The officers noticed the growing attention and shifted uncomfortably. "Look," the younger one said, lowering his voice, "just be careful walking alone. It's late. That's all." She nodded, her calmness never wavering. "Thank you. I will." The older officer closed her wallet and handed it back. "You can go." His tone was softer now, almost hesitant. She took her wallet, offered a polite nod, and began walking again. She didn't hurry, didn't look back, didn't let the moment rattle her. She carried herself with quiet confidence, the kind that came not from arrogance but from knowing her own strength. The officers watched her walk away, the silence between them heavy. They knew they had misjudged her. And though neither said it out loud, both felt a small shift inside, a realization that their assumptions had been wrong. By the time she reached her neighborhood, the air felt warmer, the tension behind her fading with every step. She could finally breathe easily again. When she stepped inside her home, she placed her things on the table and poured herself a warm drink. She didn't think too deeply about the encounter. To her, it wasn't the first time people had made assumptions about her. It probably wouldn't be the last. She sat quietly, sipping her drink, unaware that the officers were still talking about her a few blocks away. They were confused, embarrassed, and curious. Something about that brief meeting bothered them, not because she had done anything wrong, but because they had. But she didn't know that yet. To her, it was just an uncomfortable moment on her walk home. A moment she shook off with a deep breath and a small smile. She believed in staying calm, even when something felt unfair. She always had. What she didn't see was how that simple moment, that small conversation on a quiet street, would soon grow into something much bigger. Something she never asked for, never expected, and never needed, but something that would change how people saw her for now. Though she simply closed her eyes, resting after a long day, unaware that this was only the beginning, the next morning in Brookville started like any other. With the sun peeking through the curtains and the smell of fresh bread from nearby bakeries filling the streets, but inside the police station, the atmosphere was tense, unusual, and thick with unease. The officers who had confronted the girl last night sat at their desks, reviewing their notes and replaying the events over and over in their minds. Every detail seemed to carry weight now. The realization of who they had spoken to was still settling in. The older officer, usually calm and confident, leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "I still can't believe it," he muttered. "We were rude to her, and we didn't even know who she was." His partner sat quietly, looking down at the floor, playing her calm eyes and steady voice. Word spread quickly inside the station. Soon, the story reached the chief. The moment he heard it, his expression hardened. He understood the implications immediately. Confronting the mayor's daughter, even unknowingly, was serious. It wasn't just about protocol. It was about reputation, authority, and public perception. The chief called the two officers into his office. They entered quietly, their steps hesitant. The office was lined with certificates, awards, and photographs of community events. Behind the desk, the chief looked up from a folder he was reviewing, and his eyes were sharp but measured. "Sit down," he said firmly. The officers obeyed, sensing the seriousness in his tone. "We need to go over what happened last night," he continued. "From the beginning, every word, every action." The older officer cleared his throat. "We saw her walking alone, sir. We thought she might be causing trouble. We called her over and asked for ID. She was calm, cooperative, but he stopped, unsure how to explain the situation without making it worse." The chief leaned forward. "And she's the mayor's daughter," the younger officer admitted quietly. "We didn't know at first. We just assumed she was another teenager walking around." Silence filled the room. The chief exhaled slowly, the weight of the situation pressing down on everyone. "Do you realize what could have happened? How this looks? Not just to the mayor, but to the public." The older officer nodded. "Yes, sir. We understand. We were wrong. Our assumptions, they were wrong." Chief leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Assumptions like these can cost trust. They can damage community relationships, and they can make people lose faith in the system. I need to know you understand that." "Yes, sir," both officers said in unison, their voices low. Outside, the news began moving quietly through town. Someone who had seen the interaction shared it with a friend, who shared it with another, and soon it reached social media. The story was simple, but intriguing. A girl had calmly stood up to local officers, refusing to be intimidated. People speculated about her identity, and curiosity spread. By mid-morning, the mayor's office had received calls. Staffers mentioned that some citizens had noticed the story online. While it wasn't yet a scandal, it was enough to raise concern. The mayor, busy with his morning meetings, listened carefully. When he learned that his daughter was involved, a protective instinct surged through him. He trusted her judgment, knew her character. But the idea that she might have been treated unfairly left him uneasy. Meanwhile, she continued with her day, oblivious to the storm brewing. She went to her classes, helped a friend who was struggling with a project, and volunteered in a small community initiative at school. To her, the encounter had already passed. She hadn't thought of it as anything special. She believed in fairness and respect, and she had acted according to her principles. That was enough. Back at the station, the chief decided a meeting with the officers' supervisors was necessary. The goal wasn't punishment. It was accountability in ensuring that such assumptions would not happen again. He also wanted to know how they could prevent misunderstandings like this in the future. Training programs, community engagement initiatives, and new protocols were discussed, all designed to reinforce proper conduct. As the day progressed, the officers replayed the encounter repeatedly. They remembered the way she had met their gaze without hesitation, the calm in her voice, the polite firmness that had left them momentarily speechless. Each recollection brought more embarrassment, but also a small respect. It was clear she wasn't intimidated by authority, but rather, she held herself with dignity and intelligence. By late afternoon, the mayor's office made contact with the police department. They requested a report on the incident. The officers provided the details honestly, without embellishment. Noting how she had cooperated fully and how calm she had remained even when they overstepped, the mayor read the report carefully. He was proud of his daughter, but he also felt a need to ensure the situation was handled with care. He wanted the department to acknowledge the misunderstanding and use it as a learning experience. There was no desire for confrontation, only accountability and respect. Back in school, she felt a subtle shift in attention. Friends whispered, teachers nodded approvingly, and she noticed curious glances from people she didn't know well. It wasn't gossip or ridicule, it was a quiet recognition of something different about her. She stayed grounded as always, focusing on the tasks at hand. But she couldn't help noticing the small change in how people perceived her. They saw her confidence, her composure, and the way she handled the unexpected evening arrived, bringing a calm hush over the town. Yet the story of her encounter with the officers lingered. The department implemented discussions about the incident, highlighting the importance of careful judgment, community awareness, and respect for citizens, regardless of age or appearance. Some officers admitted privately that they had learned a valuable lesson about assumptions and authority. The girl, unaware of much of this, sat quietly at home, finishing her homework and reflecting on her day. She thought about fairness, respect, and the small ways people could influence one another. Standing calmly in the face of authority wasn't about proving a point. It was about maintaining one's dignity and integrity. That, she knew, was far more important than the reactions of those around her. As night fell again over Brookville, the story continued to ripple through the town. People discussed it with curiosity, admiration, and in some cases, mild frustration at the officers' initial assumptions. Social media posts circulated, each version slightly different, but all conveying the same message. A girl had shown calm strength and integrity, challenging assumptions. In leaving a mark on the community, the officers reflected on what had happened and recognized that real strength didn't come from authority or intimidation. It came from truth, composure, and the courage to stand up even when misunderstood. They would carry that lesson forward, hoping to prevent future misunderstandings and to act with more awareness. By the end of the day, it was clear to everyone involved the girl had done nothing wrong. If anything, she had reminded her community, the police, and even her peers that courage could be quiet, dignified, and firm. She had turned a simple walk home into a moment of learning for those around her. And while she continued her life mostly unaware of the full attention she had drawn, her actions had already begun to influence attitudes, conversations, and the way people would think about fairness and respect in the future. For her, it was just another day of helping, learning, and moving through the world with integrity. For the police officers, the mayor, and the community, it was the beginning of a story they would not soon forget, a story about judgment, humility, and the quiet power of standing firm in truth. The morning after, the officers discovered who she was. The story began to spread faster than anyone could have predicted. What had started as a simple encounter on a quiet street became a topic of conversation across Brookville. People were curious, some outraged, some impressed, and some simply fascinated by the idea of a young girl calmly standing up to authority. News reached local social media pages and forums. The incident was described in short, simple posts. A girl walking home alone, confronted by police and refusing to be intimidated. Many posts were filled with admiration. People praised her composure, her courage, and the way she spoke calmly yet firmly. Others criticized the officers, questioning why they had treated a young girl in that way. At the police station, tension had grown significantly. Officers whispered in hallways, unsure of how the story would unfold. The chief called an urgent meeting to discuss the growing attention. "We have to handle this carefully," he said, "not only because of the mayor's daughter, but because the public is watching. Every action we take now is important." The two officers involved sat quietly, listening. They were embarrassed, but they also understood the gravity of the situation. They had misjudged her, and now the consequences were beginning to surface. The chief continued, emphasizing the importance of transparency, proper conduct, and learning from mistakes. Discussions were held about training, community engagement, and the ways officers could avoid similar misunderstandings in the future. Meanwhile, at school, she noticed people whispering and glancing in her direction. Friends asked quietly if she was okay, and she smiled gently, assuring them that everything was fine. She didn't want the incident to define her day or overshadow her work in school. Still, a small part of her realized that the encounter had left a mark, not because she had done anything extraordinary, but because she had acted with integrity in a situation where others had misjudged her. The mayor's office received multiple inquiries from concerned citizens. People wanted to know if his daughter was safe, if the police had behaved properly, and what steps would be taken to ensure fairness. The mayor was firm, but calm. He appreciated the concern, but knew the most important thing was to guide the department toward accountability. There was no need for anger, only clarity and proper action. He instructed his staff to monitor the situation closely while remaining discreet by midday. Local news outlets began reporting on the story. The coverage was careful, highlighting her calmness, the officer's assumptions, and the town's growing interest. Headlines spoke of courage, respect, and lessons about judgment. In interviews, reporters described the incident without exaggeration, focusing on the message it carried, a reminder that appearances can be misleading, and that fairness matters more than assumptions. Inside the police department, the officers reviewed their actions repeatedly. They spoke to colleagues, admitting that they had acted hastily and without proper observation. One officer said quietly, "I can't believe how calm she was. I expected fear or maybe hesitation. But she just stood there, polite, composed, unshaken." The other officer nodded, realizing that in that brief encounter, she had quietly taught them an important lesson about respect and authority. As the town began to discuss the incident, it sparked broader conversations about respect for citizens, the use of authority, and the ways assumptions can lead to mistakes. Community leaders held small meetings to discuss improving relations between police and the people they served. While the incident had caused initial concern, it became an opportunity for reflection and learning. At home, she carried on with her usual activities. She helped her younger sibling with homework, prepared a simple dinner, and spent time reading. She didn't dwell on the attention she was receiving. For her, the encounter was not about fame or recognition, it was about acting rightly when faced with an unfair situation. She reflected on the importance of staying calm, standing firm in the truth, and treating others with respect, even when they failed to do the same. By evening, discussions about the incident had reached almost every corner of the town. People shared their thoughts on social media, in cafes, and at local shops. The story had transformed into a lesson. Courage was not always loud, and strength was not always visible. The girl's composure and honesty became a quiet source of inspiration for many. The officers involved were called to meet with the mayor privately. He spoke to them with a steady voice, explaining the significance of their actions and the potential consequences. He did not yell or berate them. Instead, he focused on understanding, accountability, and guidance. "We all make mistakes," he said. "What matters is how we respond, learn, and move forward. The officers listened intently, understanding for the first time the full impact of their assumptions and behavior. Meanwhile, the girl's friends and teachers continued to support her, emphasizing the positive example she had set. No one treated her differently in a negative way. Instead, they admired her courage and composure, reinforcing the idea that standing firm in truth was both rare and important. The town began to see subtle changes. Police officers became more cautious, respectful, and aware in their interactions. Citizens became more vocal about fairness, knowing that their voices mattered. The incident, though small in scale, created a ripple effect that affected the way people viewed authority and responsibility. That night, the girl sat quietly in her room, reflecting on the events. She understood that she had acted correctly, that her calmness had made a difference, and that her actions had sparked a larger conversation about respect and fairness. She smiled, feeling a quiet satisfaction. She didn't need recognition, because she knew that standing firm in truth was reward enough. In the following days, the town slowly returned to its normal rhythm. People continued their routines, schools went on as usual, and life seemed calm again. Yet the incident remained in memory. It was a reminder that courage could be subtle, respect could be quietly powerful, and integrity mattered more than assumptions or appearances. The story of the encounter with the police, the calm girl who refused to be intimidated, and the lessons it taught would stay with the town for a long time. It wasn't a story of conflict or drama. It was a story of dignity, honesty, and the quiet power of standing firm. And for her, life continued, grounded in the belief that actions rooted in truth and respect were worth more than any attention or recognition. The following week, the town of Brookville buzzed with quiet anticipation. The incident had settled into conversations, whispers, and online discussions, but it was far from forgotten. People were curious about how it would end, whether the police would admit their mistakes, and how the mayor would respond. In the police station, the atmosphere was tense but purposeful. The chief had scheduled a formal meeting between the mayor, his daughter, and the department to address the situation directly. The goal was clear: to acknowledge what had happened, to learn from it, and to find a way to strengthen trust between the police and the community. The girl, calm as ever, accompanied her father to the meeting. She was not nervous. She understood the importance of the conversation, and she also knew that speaking with honesty and respect was more powerful than anger or fear. The mayor had a steady hand on her shoulder, reassuring her. But he trusted her to present herself as she always did: firm, composed, and sincere. The room was simple. A conference room with a long table and chairs around it. The chief sat at one end, while the officers involved sat with visible tension in their posture. The mayor and his daughter sat at the other end, and the conversation began with a measured, calm tone. The chief spoke first. "We wanted to meet today to discuss the events that took place last Friday evening. It is clear that mistakes were made, and we are here to take responsibility and ensure this does not happen again." The officers nodded, their faces serious. They were not defensive. They knew they had acted hastily and without proper judgment. The mayor leaned forward slightly. "I appreciate your acknowledgement. This situation could have been handled differently, and it is important for all of us to understand the impact of assumptions and how we treat members of this community, no matter who they are." He turned to his daughter. "Would you like to share your perspective?" She nodded gently. "I want to make it clear that I was not trying to make trouble. I was walking home from an event and I answered all questions politely. I understand that officers have a difficult job, but assumptions should not guide actions. Everyone deserves respect, and calm communication should be the first approach." Her words were measured and thoughtful. She spoke from experience, from a place of integrity and confidence, not from anger or frustration. The officers listened, their expressions showing realization and regret. They could see clearly now how their assumptions had caused necessary tension and embarrassment. The chief spoke again. "We have reviewed procedures. We will implement additional training focused on community interaction, respect, and observation before action. This incident will serve as a learning opportunity for all of us." One of the officers quietly added, "I want to apologize personally. I understand now how wrong we were. and I regret making assumptions. I hope we can do better in the future." The girl nodded, accepting the apology gracefully. "I believe everyone can learn from mistakes. What matters is that we recognize them and move forward with better understanding." The mayor acknowledged the apology. "This is not about blame or punishment. It is about accountability and improvement. We all have a role in building trust and ensuring fair treatment. Today's discussion is a step in that direction." The meeting continued with a focus on solutions. The chief and the mayor discussed ways to improve police training and community relations. Ideas included workshops, open forums, and events where officers and citizens could communicate more directly. They agreed that transparency and respect must guide all interactions, that assumptions based on appearances should never drive decisions. Outside the meeting, the town continued to talk quietly. Many residents had heard about the scheduled discussion and felt a sense of hope that the situation would be resolved fairly. Social media posts reflected support for calm communication, learning from mistakes, and reinforcing respect for all citizens. At school, the girl's friends noticed a subtle change. While she had always been respected for her composure and kindness, the incident now carried a quiet admiration. Teachers and peers alike seemed to regard her with an appreciation that went beyond normal recognition. She, however, remained focused on her studies, her volunteer work, her daily responsibilities. The officers left the meeting with a renewed understanding. They reflected privately on how assumptions could cloud judgment and how patience, observation, and respectful communication were essential in every interaction. One officer said softly, "I will never forget the calm way she spoke. It taught me more than any training ever could." The mayor and his daughter returned home, discussing the meeting calmly. "I am proud of how you handled yourself," he said. "You showed integrity, patience, and respect. You've made a real difference, not just for yourself, but for the entire town." She smiled quietly. "I just wanted to be fair. I hope others can learn from this too." In the following days, the police department began implementing changes. Officers received training on community engagement, understanding context before acting, and ensuring every interaction was conducted with respect. Public meetings were held to discuss concerns and reinforce the commitment to fair treatment. The incident became a turning point, a lesson in humility and learning for both law enforcement and citizens. Meanwhile, the girl continued her normal routine. She walked to school, helped her friends, volunteered in the community, and spent quiet time reflecting at home. She did not let the attention change her. Instead, she used it as motivation to remain consistent in her values: honesty, calmness, and integrity. The town of Brookville watched as the situation unfolded and was resolved. It became a story not of confrontation, but of understanding, accountability, and growth. People began to see the importance of listening, observing carefully, and treating each other with fairness. The girl's calm strength had set an example that rippled through the community by the end of the week. The atmosphere felt lighter. The officers had learned a valuable lesson, the community had regained confidence, and the mayor's daughter had reinforced her quiet but firm influence. The story, once tense and uncertain, became a narrative of learning, respect, and the power of integrity. It was a reminder that courage is not always loud, and that standing firm with dignity can lead to real, lasting change. For her, the resolution was simple. She had acted with fairness, spoken with honesty, and respected everyone involved. She had made a difference not through confrontation, but through calmness, patience, and unwavering integrity. And as life returned to its normal rhythm, the town of Brookville carried with it a valuable lesson. Respect, understanding, and humility matter more than assumptions. And one person's courage can quietly inspire many. The weeks following the official meeting brought a quiet but noticeable change to the town of Brookville. The story of the girl and the police officers became more than just gossip or social. Media chatter, it became a lesson woven into the fabric of the community. People began to reflect on assumptions, respect, and the importance of fairness in their everyday interactions. At the police station, the atmosphere had transformed. The officers involved had taken their experience seriously. They now approached their duties with more patience and awareness, always considering context and respecting each individual. Training sessions were held, emphasizing empathy, careful observation, and clear communication. Senior officers spoke of the incident as a reminder that authority was not about asserting power, but about serving and protecting the community with fairness and understanding. The girl's father, the mayor, watched this transformation with quiet satisfaction. He was proud not only of his daughter's courage and composure, but also of the way the community and police had learned from the situation. He continued his work, using the incident as an example in meetings and public forums, advocating for better communication between authorities and citizens, and reinforcing the importance of integrity, respect, and patience in every interaction. For the girl, life returned mostly to normal. She continued attending school, helping her friends, volunteering in the community, and maintaining the routines that grounded her. Yet the story followed her quietly, creating subtle admiration and respect from those who knew her. Teachers often praised her patience and thoughtfulness. Classmates looked to her as an example of calm composure, and even people she did not know well seemed to treat her with a quiet acknowledgement of her integrity. One afternoon, she walked home after helping at a local food bank. The streets were familiar, calm, and peaceful. She remembered the first confrontation with the police and how she had felt then. Looking back, she realized that standing firm, remaining polite, and communicating with honesty had made all the difference. It was not about being noticed, being admired, or proving a point. It was about staying true to herself and showing others that fairness and dignity were worth more than confrontation or fear. As she approached her home, she noticed a small group of children playing near the corner. They waved at her, and she waved back. It struck her how small gestures of calmness and respect could ripple outward. She had faced a moment that could have been tense and upsetting, yet by handling it with composure, she had influenced not just the officers, but the entire community. Even small actions, she realized, could create lasting effects. The police department held follow-up meetings with community members. Citizens shared their experiences and concerns. Officers listened, and together they found new ways to strengthen trust and understanding. Workshops, open forums, and outreach programs were organized, all inspired by the events that had begun on that quiet Friday evening. The girl's simple act of composure had sparked meaningful changes that extended far beyond her personal experience. In school, discussions emerged about fairness, courage, and the importance of treating everyone with respect. Teachers used her story as an example of integrity. Students were encouraged to consider how they reacted in situations of conflict or misunderstanding. It became a subtle lesson, not imposed, but naturally absorbed by those around her. She did not seek attention for it, yet her behavior quietly influenced peers, reminding them that calmness and honesty were powerful tools. The mayor occasionally shared her story in meetings, emphasizing lessons about communication, observation, and patience. Sometimes he said, "The greatest courage is quiet, and the greatest strength is calm. My daughter taught us that." His words were not boastful, but sincere, recognizing the value of her actions in shaping a better community. As months passed, the incident became part of Brookville's collective memory. People remembered the story of the girl who had walked home quietly, answered questions politely, and stood firm in the face of assumptions. They remembered how the police had learned from the encounter, how the mayor had used it to reinforce fairness, and how the community had begun to focus more on respect and understanding. The incident, once tense and uncertain, had become a source of inspiration. At home, she reflected on the journey. She understood that the impact of her actions would continue quietly, affecting people in ways she might never see. She felt content, knowing that integrity, calmness, respect could create change without anger, confrontation, or noise. She also understood the value of learning from mistakes, not just others' mistakes, but her own, and how each experience could guide future actions. The girl continued her volunteer work, helping the elderly, assisting at local charities, and supporting classmates in need. She remained humble, grounded, and focused on the simple principles that had guided her through the police encounter. honesty, calmness, and respect. People noticed her consistency, and it reinforced the lesson she had already taught. Actions rooted in integrity were remembered longer than words, spoken in anger or haste. Occasionally, she would meet the same officers on community events or during routine interactions. The initial tension was gone, replaced with mutual respect and understanding. They greeted her politely, aware of the earlier incident, but there was no awkwardness or discomfort. They recognized her as someone who had quietly taught them a lesson they would carry forward for the rest of their careers. Life in Brookville continued, but the story remained a reference point. New residents and younger students heard it as a tale of courage and composure. The police department continued to evolve, ensuring fairness and careful observation in every interaction. The community held on to the lesson that assumptions could mislead, but respect, patience, and calm integrity could guide toward understanding. And through it all, she lived simply, quietly, and purposefully. She understood that real courage often went unnoticed, and that influence could be subtle yet powerful. She knew that fairness and respect were not just abstract ideas, but principles that shaped the way people treated each other every day. Her life remained ordinary in appearance, yet extraordinary in the quiet impact she had made on her community. The town of Brookville had learned, grown, and changed, all because one girl had walked home calmly, answered questions honestly, and remained steadfast in her dignity. The incident would always be remembered, not for conflict, not for fear, but for the lessons it carried, lessons about patience, respect, courage, and the quiet power of integrity.